Dylan William is quoted as saying that the only important thing about feedback is what students do with it. So let's look at 3 strategies to make your feedback more useful for students. Comments such as good boy or good girl are judgments and do not give students any useful information. Instead, try and provide students with specific information about the task, the process, or the strategies they used by describing what you see students do and hear them say. For example, a young student is learning the letter names and sounds. You've asked them to point to the animal that begins with the sound D, and you observe the student as they point to the picture of a dog. Your feedback should describe what the student is doing correctly, such as, "That's right, you pointed to the dog. The first sound in dog is D." Sometimes you will need more information about what the student is doing before you can give them feedback. For example, you notice that a student has made an error in their multiplication and need to understand where they went wrong. So you say something like, "Tell me how you worked out the answer to 52 times 35, and you listen to their response. At times, it can be difficult to know how much feedback to give students. If you give them too little feedback, they won't know what they need to do, and if you try and fix everything at once by giving them too much feedback, they will just get confused and not know where to begin. As a guide, you should give students just enough feedback to help them understand what to do next by limiting your feedback to the most important points. Susan Brockhart calls this the Goldilocks principle: not too much, not too little, but just the right amount of feedback. If we use a previous math example and presume the student was unable to self-correct, you could provide them with just enough information to fix the error. For example, you could prompt the student by asking a question such as, "In 52 times 35, when you multiply by the 3, what are you really multiplying by?" Lastly, the timing of your feedback is important, as students need enough time to use the information. For this reason, the most effective time for feedback is while the student is engaged in the task. For example, "Okay, James, we have practiced using adjectives to make your story more interesting. Now it's your turn to have a go at using some awesome adjectives in your story." Please turn to Activity 5 in your workbook to practice applying these 3 feedback strategies to your support practice. Before we continue, let's review Part 2, Effective Feedback Strategies. Formative feedback has the potential to improve how students learn. When you give students feedback, it should be right for the student's level of understanding. You can use feedback to build knowledge, skills, and confidence, provide practice in applying the strategies needed to do a task, and to encourage students to self-evaluate their progress. You may find it useful to refer to Module 2 for more information on how to scaffold learning. You can also make your feedback more useful to students by describing what students do and say, giving students just enough feedback to help them understand what to do next by limiting your feedback to the most important points, and giving students enough time to use the information. Lastly, as you have learned, giving effective feedback relies on having a reasonable understanding of the content and processes needed to do a task, as well as knowing the student. TAs are not expected to do this independently and need the expertise and guidance of teachers to help students reach their potential.